The first speaker in the session is Chen-Da Liu-Zhang, speaking about recent advances in asynchronous MPC.
Okay. Do you guys hear me? Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to all the organizers for this amazing workshop. I'm super happy to be here, and today I'm going to talk about some of the recent advances in asynchronous multi-party computation, in particular the progress that we have made in pushing these protocols closer to more applied or practical. Yeah. So the topic is on general secure computation on private data over asynchronous networks. So as an example, consider a geo-distributed environment where participating parties are in different parts of the world, right? And this is challenging because the network delays can be unpredictable, right? Yeah. Sorry about that. I think the picture was like, good point. I'll have a look afterwards, yeah. So this is a challenging setting because the network delays can be unpredictable, right? So for example, intercontinental latency can be around 100 milliseconds, let's say, but the latency can easily increase to 300 or 500 milliseconds due to network congestion, retransmissions, or routing detours, right? And then you can ask the question, well, what is the right type of protocol that we should use in such an environment with unpredictable network delays, right? And of course, one option is to use a synchronous protocol. And we have already seen this motivation, but these are protocols that are operate under the assumption that the network delay is always bounded by some fixed parameter delta. But of course, the problem is how do I set the delta now? And if the delta is too small, then it can actually happen that we have some network delay that spikes, and then we may lose some security guarantees or liveness, right? And if the delta is too big, then the protocol becomes more inefficient. So in this talk, we are going to focus on so-called asynchronous MPC protocols, which do not have this issue because they can handle arbitrary delays. That's a good thing. And these are protocols that intuitively are message-driven. And this means that they also satisfy this nice property that these protocols run at the speed of the actual network delay, right? So parties don't need to wait for all the messages. As soon as enough messages arrive, then they can proceed with the computation. So what did we achieve in this setting of general secure computation over asynchronous network? So if there is a single or a simple message that you can take from this talk is that we had this journey where using our resource, we managed to go from secure computation of relatively small circuits like 30,000, 40,000 gates and small number of parties like tens of parties to secure computation with more than 100 parties over this geo-distributed environment and much larger circuits, something like 200,000 gates. So that's the message of today. So how did we do this? So we managed to do this with a series of results that we achieved in the last few years. So the first paper at Crypto last year with Vipul, who is in the audience, and also Ifan, was a really theoretical paper, right? So one of the things to scale to hundreds was that it would be nice to really break some of the asymptotic barriers in the communication complexity of previous protocols. But that was just an asymptotic feasibility result, right? And then in the second paper, we realized that to make these protocols more efficient, we probably had to focus more on developing new techniques to balance the communication and the computation. And then finally, in the third paper, which was accepted at CCS recently, we made these protocols a little bit more practical, where we improved the constants and managed to scale these protocols to hundreds of parties with decent-sized circuits. So the problem that we consider, we already know. This is secure computation, right? The parties located maybe in different parts of the world want to build this distributed system where each party provides input, which is private, and we want to perform a series of operations on their data with 2 security guarantees, correctness and privacy, as we know. So of course, we want the parties to obtain the correct outputs, and potential attackers shouldn't learn anything about the inputs from honest parties. So when we talk about MPC, as we know, the efficiency not only depends on the number of parties, right, but also on the computation that the parties would like to perform, right? And we typically model the computation with an arithmetic circuit, and the number of gates is the main complexity here. So in the real world, we have this set of parties which are connected via a complete network of point-to-point channels. 3 of them are controlled by the adversary, and they want to perform a secure computation over a circuit with C gates. And as I said, the network is going to have unpredictable delays, which also means that the messages can be delivered out of order. And we consider, for the purpose of this talk, we consider a fully malicious adversary, which means that the corrupted parties can behave in an arbitrary way. So we saw in the paper by Arpita some very nice overview of the communication complexity of asynchronous MPC. Here I'm going to focus on works that achieve the optimal resilience of n/3, and also included some of the protocols that use cryptography, not only information theoretic protocols. So this literature on asynchronous secure computation started already in the 90s, right? And since then, there has been some significant line of work improving the bandwidth of these protocols. And in parentheses, I indicated the communication complexity of these protocols. And as I said, one crucial aspect in scaling such protocols to 100 parties was to balance the communication and the computation. And in particular, looking into protocols that make use of light cryptography. What is light cryptography? This is, not very well defined, but I would say, let's say light crypto is something that takes, for each operations, a few microseconds. So something like hashing, symmetric crypto, something like that, is what I call light crypto here. Whereas heavy crypto is something like public key encryption, which takes maybe 100, 1,000 times more, right? So you see here that in the 2008, for example, there was either a quadratic protocol using this heavy crypto, linear homomorphic encryption, or a protocol that was actually information theoretic that used no crypto, but with n⁵ communication, right? And after that, there was essentially like 15 years of not too much progress. But finally, in 23, there was this paper that improved the communication complexity to n⁴, also without using any crypto. And first result last year at Crypto, we managed to give the first protocol with linear communication and this optimal resilience of n/3. And since then, there are also other groups worldwide that are working in this direction. For example, there was a Usenix paper last year that achieved a relatively low overhead. This is the SLLWDT, but still C times n², right? And many other works. And in this talk, I will talk about 3 of the results that use light crypto, which I highlighted in bold.
Just a general question, if you consider n to be large, don't you really want to employ share packing from a practical perspective, right? You get tiny loss of resilience with a huge increase in performance. So that's the point. From a practical, I can understand the theory side, but from a practical perspective, why insist on optimal threshold when you have many parties?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah. But how many parties do you need, right? And when we talk about concrete numbers, right? Like for example, if you go to 200 parties or something like that, it still doesn't pay off, right? So here for example, this protocol was practical for, let's say, tens of parties. In our protocols, the bottleneck is actually not this C times n. Is for example the additive overhead or other parts,
But
basically,
you
or
can
the
amortize
computation.
this as well, right? If you have packed secret sharing, everything is amortized, so you just get more bang for your buck by slightly losing the discretion.
Sure, that is true, but you also need to look at the constants and so on, right? So there is a, once you compute the numbers, then and you look at the constants, then you, like, at the end of the day, the game is how to get the best numbers, right? If you say instead of n over 3, I do n over little bit less than 3, then maybe the constant is too large, or maybe you go to n over 4 or n over 5, and then you say, okay, maybe I have 100 parties, and what is the...
My question is whether this direction was explored or whether this will be explored in the future.
There are some works that, there are some protocols that of course achieve, like, are a little bit simpler and more efficient for lower resilience. I don't think there was a lot of papers that actually focus on the concrete constants, even for slightly lower thresholds. But I guess there are things that we can do, yes, for sure. Yeah. So the technical agenda of today is a battery of protocols that use lightweight cryptography based on these 3 results that I mentioned. So the first result breaks this quadratic barrier that I said that existed for a few decades and gives the first protocol with C times N communication. And as I said, on the other hand, the additive overhead is pretty horrible, N to the 14. The second result introduces new techniques to, significantly reduce the additive overhead while keeping only to light crypto. And the third result improves the overhead a little bit more, but the constants by a factor more than 10, making the protocol closer to practice, right? And as a bonus, all these protocols are, post-quantum secure because of the kind of tools that we use. So let's start with the first result. I'm not gonna explain this one very in depth because, and you should stick around. There will be another talk by Ethan who will explain, like how to do like a very elegant information theoretic protocol with linear communication. But in general, all these protocols, when you try to minimize this communication, they are all sharing based, right? And at a high level, you can think that parties start by splitting their secret into pieces, right, which we call share. Then you distribute the shares to all parties. And then, after you distributed the shares to the parties, then you proceed gate by gate. And for each gate, every party has a share of the input wire. And then you compute the share of the output wire, and so on and so forth, right? And at the end, the parties pull their pieces together to get the output, right? So how do they distribute the secret? We just use some Shamir sharing, which is just a degree T polynomial. We already know this, right? Any T parties don't know anything. Yes?
What is the order of quantifier? Like, do you fix the circuit first, fixing the arithmetic gates, then the number of parties, and like, then you choose the finite field, or in which order you quantify? Because, or do you choose n first, then sufficiently large prime field, and then your arithmetic gate over that field?
But these are just for concrete numbers. These are just all fixed. N equals, we'll go to the benchmarks. N equals 112, C equals 200,000, and whatever,
The
right?
circuit uses which gates?
Arithmetic gates, addition and multiplication gates.
Over what?
Over a finite field of a particular size, which is to security parameter, which is all concrete, right? So, yeah. So when we do this computation, right, because we use Shamir sharing, then the addition gates are for free. Multiplication gates are typically more expensive. How do we do the multiplication gates? Well, there are several ways to do it. In Vipul's talk, we saw the DN trick with these double sharings. Another way is to do Beaver triples, which we used in this paper. And the idea, I'm not going to recall this. The idea is just that to process multiplication gates, you can reduce one multiplication to 2 public reconstructions, right? And then the online phase will only be about public reconstructions, and you only do linear operations, right? So, one idea that we had in this paper was that we had this idea to generate beavers with linear cost per triple, right? And I think this was an elegant idea because we designed these two processes where each of the processes generates triples cheaply, but they only work if the adversary follows a certain adversary strategy. So process 1 generates triples cheaply if the adversary strategy is in some set S, while process 2 generates triples if the adversary is in strategies in some set S bar, right? And then what we did was to basically combine these two processes in such a way that that the adversary either has to follow one particular strategy. So either so essentially either you harm both processes at the same time or none. So I'm not going to go into details, but this was the crypto paper that we had. So this is what we did in the crypto paper. We managed to break this quadratic barrier, but the additive overhead was quite high, and the protocol is completely theoretical, right?
So just to make sure that I understand, so this is inherently, you will add affected the circuit is arithmetic, and the size of the field is much larger than the number of parties. Like for Boolean circuits and large, this thing, like you'll have extra.
Yeah, actually in the beginning we had size of the field due to the security parameter, but with these reverse-friendly encodings and so on, we managed to bring it down. Yeah.
So for Boolean circuits, you get the same type?
I think so. Yeah. But this was actually only an update to the ePrint. It's not in the conference version. Yeah. So in the second crypto paper, we reduced this additive overhead, right? And at the time, we thought that information theoretically, it was going to be hard, even though you will see later that is, you can reduce this additive overhead a little bit without using crypto. But how did we do this? So we realized that the Crypto 24 paper had a huge communication due to the additive overhead, as I said. And another thing that we knew was that the Crypto 24 paper used no crypto. So every operation was field arithmetic, right, which is pretty fast, right? And at the time, there was another protocol published at Usenix, as I said, where the communication was C times n squared. With low overhead, and this was definitely more practical, right? And we saw that that in their experiments, their protocol only scaled to tens of parties. So, and the reason for that was that they were using some public key operations, right? So what we did was, what if we use only a little bit of crypto, right? So we came up with a protocol that has linear C times n communication, some reasonable additive overhead, but where all the operations are light, so in the order of microseconds. So this space of lightweight cryptography for secure computation protocols, I would say, is a space that hasn't been very well explored yet. And most of the prior protocols either use no crypto, are information theoretic, or use heavy crypto, right? Or what I say, heavy crypto in this talk. So we saw the potential to designing protocols that scale much higher using light crypto, especially if the communication is also low, which is what we targeted to achieve. So how did we do this? So we started from this general approach where there is a pre-processing phase to generate beaver triples and an online phase where the parties process the computation gates, just like before. But then we actually did it a little bit different, right? We expanded this paradigm by adding these new, like cheating identification techniques, which are quite popular in the synchronous setting, but that we managed to incorporate for the first time in the literature of asynchronous MPC. And at a very high level, so let's say this is the online phase, right? So we changed the online phase a little bit. So the distribution of secrets is done with a new primitive instead of using this typical complete secret sharing, which is what we call it in the asynchronous setting. Everyone gets 1 point in this Shamir sharing of degree T. we use this ACSS with identifiable abort, which guarantees that parties either distribute the secret correctly or have a proof that the dealer is corrupted. And this proof is made using hashes, and that's why hashes are kind of useful, right? So then we divided the circuit into segments, right? A bunch of linear number of subcircuits. And for each subcircuit, the idea is we run a verification procedure, which basically guarantees that the subcircuit succeeds in the evaluation, or we agree on a corrupted party. And this is possible because intuitively with Beaver triples, all the subcircuits consist only of public reconstructions. So parties kind of have agreement on what is going on. And we did something similar also to the pre-processing phase, right? So we not only optimized the online phase, but also the Beaver triple generation itself. So instead of relying on the double process technique that I talked about earlier, we leveraged the Beaver triple protocol also with party elimination techniques. And we started with standard triple generation technique, right, with these double sharings. So you prepare A and B, right, and then you prepare these double sharings and you reconstruct AB plus R, right? This is the DN trick. And then to compute the third component, you just subtract the original sharing, but with degree T, right? And of course, that triple generation doesn't really, is not good enough as is because public reconstruction is too costly. So we did it a little bit differently. So at a high level, we, okay, this is really oversimplified, I would say, but there will be a very nice crypto talk this year. So for those that are going to crypto, I think Xiaoyu is one of the co-authors is presenting this paper. So you guys should definitely go there to get details here. So at a high level, we divided this triple generation into n batches, and each batch is led by one king. And the king is the one that computes the sharing of the third component of the triple instead of everyone. And of course, the king could be cheating, so we need to run this verification procedure, which either results in, let's say, L over n good triples, or a cheating party is identified. Oversimplifying lots of things. But yeah, this is good enough because when the king is honest, the process succeeds, right? Kind of. Yeah. So we have introduced these new techniques to lower the additive overhead while keeping the computation low. But unfortunately, after checking the constants, we saw that the hidden constant is something like 100. So which made the protocol kind of not very practical again, right? So basically, it took us a third step to push these boundaries, right, and reduce the constant by factor 10, and also the additive overhead a little bit as well. So this is the complete picture of our works. So this communication complexity is quite, or I would say closer to the best that we have in the synchronous setting as well, because if I remember correctly, the constant in the synchronous setting is something like 4 or 5, right, next to the circuit size, and ours is 9. So we are getting there. So I'm not gonna go very technical here, but here are some of the details, right? So the protocol closely follows this Crypto 25 blueprint with a few modifications, right? So first, instead of guaranteed output delivery, we are going to settle with a weaker security guarantee, right? Which is just fairness in this case. This means that the adversary may abort the protocol, but will not learn the output. And then we give an optimized version of this new primitive that I said ACSS with identifiable abort that has a very low overhead, which we achieve based on some notion of asynchronous verifiable information dispersal. For those that know, I will talk about this a little bit. And then we also use symmetric key encryption to ensure privacy. And then we also have some techniques to lower the constants even more, where we import ideas from prior works in the synchronous setting, like Atlas, for those that know about this work, to the asynchronous setting. And of course, we keep using light primitives. So I will talk a little bit about, I don't have time to talk about the full construction, right, that we had in the CCS paper, but maybe it helps if I talk a little bit about the ACSS protocol, right, with abort. So this ACSS guarantees that everyone gets this point, right, in a degree T Shamir sharing. So the first ingredient is what we call this private send with verifiable delivery with abort. There's too many ifs. So this is a primitive that acts as a private channel between a sender and a recipient. So one of the issues in the asynchronous setting is that when A sends a message to B, the other parties don't know what is happening, right? They don't know whether B got the message or didn't get the message and so on. So with these primitives, the parties can verifiably check that the recipient received the message. And how does this work? So this is basically a verifiable information dispersal scheme. So you can actually do this with communication complexity that is proportional to the size of the input. So could leave it as an exercise, but I'm going to explain. So the sender has some input message, which I have displayed there in colors, right? It's 4 blocks. To achieve overall communication complexity the same as the input size, then the sender just simply chops the input into pieces and gives one piece to each party, right? This is something you can do. And since we are in the asynchronous model, there is no single point in time at which the parties know whether they have received the piece or not, right? So to solve that, we have to run some sort of a reliable consensus protocol, which essentially is some sort of agreement protocol with reliable termination to agree on whether the honest parties received their piece or not. So if the output of this agreement is 1, then we know that, let's say, enough honest parties have received a piece. And in this case, we can just send the pieces to the receiver, right? And so this is actually a very simple protocol. And the receiver can use the pieces to recover the message. That's the idea. Of course, there are a bunch of issues with this protocol, right? First, chopping the input message into pieces doesn't give you privacy, right? We wanted to build kind of this private channel between A and B. So chopping into pieces is not a good way to preserve privacy. And we would like to make sure that there is privacy of the sender's message. So we solve this in a quite like an easy way, right? You can use symmetric key encryption. So in the paper, we show a simple protocol to establish these pairwise symmetric keys, right? And this means that the sender using these keys can distribute, instead of the input, a symmetric encryption of the input, right? So the receiver can decrypt using this key. So privacy is actually not an issue if you establish these pairwise symmetric keys, right? But if you pay enough attention, there is actually another problem, that when the receiver reconstructs, this could be the wrong message, right? Because this is because the parties in the middle can actually send incorrect points. And if you think in the asynchronous setting, there is not enough redundancy to do error correction, right? Because after this information dispersal, only T+1 honest parties have points, and T bad guys also have points, but they can invent their points, so you don't have enough points to do error correction unless you go to a lower threshold, right? But what we did in the CCS paper, we solved this simply by letting the sender broadcast, let's say, a hash of the input. And since we don't aim for guaranteed output delivery, this is fine. The receiver can check the correctness of the output simply by checking the received points with respect to the hash, right? And yeah, in the paper, we have a couple more optimizations, but this is kind of roughly the idea of this private send with verifiable delivery with abort. And then using this, you can build an ACSS protocol, and this is actually not too hard. So the high-level idea is to use this private send message on each share, which ensures that all parties receive their shares, along with what is called a distributed zero-knowledge proof, which essentially proves that the degree of the shared polynomial is correct. I'm not going to get into this, but there was prior work that this. You can think about some cut and choose protocol to prove that the degree of the polynomial is correct. So we have implemented the protocol and run some benchmarks as well. So for the application, we considered anonymous broadcasts, which basically takes k input messages, and then they run some sort of an MPC to mix these messages over a circuit that has some log square depth and with k over 2 multiplication gates per layer. And the exact computation, let's say, for the purpose of this talk, doesn't matter that much, but we considered a few values of k, which basically means that we consider circuits of 30,000 gates up to 200,000 gates, right? And the depth of the circuit, which is also important, was something between 64 and 100. So here are some of the numbers that we obtained. So this is basically a LAN network. So this means that the network delay is actually pretty small, just 1 millisecond, smaller than 1 millisecond. So on the left, we plotted the performance of our protocol, which we called Velox. There was a vote in our team, and that was the name that came out. And we compared it to the prior most efficient asynchronous MPC protocol in terms of concrete efficiency, which was called Dumbo MPC, which was published last year at Usenix. And you can see here that Dumbo MPC could only handle circuits with around 30,000 gates, a number of parties in the low to mid tens. And our protocol for this size of gates, let's say 30,000 gates, is around 30 times cheaper, more efficient. Yeah. And we can also handle larger circuits and more parties, right? So for example, when n equals 112 and 200,000 gates, we need less than 2 minutes. So this would be this part. As expected, the majority of the load comes from the pre-processing phase, which is on preparing these random sharings and so on. But of course, I talked about geo-distributed setting in the beginning, right? So this is just 1 millisecond per round trip, right? So these are the numbers in the one setting. Of course, these are a little bit higher, because in this case, the network latency is around 100 milliseconds. If you look at the graph on the right, everything looks the same, except that the online phase now takes a decent chunk of the runtime, obviously, right? Because this is where the interaction happens, right? But if you look at this graph, it is still the case that the pre-processing is the most expensive part. But one open question that we have here is to see whether one can actually, we try to balance communication and computation, right? But one could perhaps try to improve the round complexity of our protocols to further reduce the online costs, right? So we took some steps. This is the summary. I'm almost finishing. So we took some steps into making asynchronous MPC more practical and scaling it to 100 parties for some reasonably sized computation. But of course, scaling to larger circuits and larger number of parties is a territory that would be very nice to explore. And yeah, with this, I'm going to finish the talk. And would like to thank all of you for listening, and also to my wonderful set of co-authors of these 3 papers. Thank you.
I think we have time for questions if the next speaker wants to start setting up. Any questions for Chen-Da?
Can I ask who's Mom 24?
Mom, what?
I will probably not identify it.
Yeah, that's Momose. Yeah, it's a single author. Yeah. Mom 24. Yeah.
Okay, let's thank Chen-Da again.
Thank you.
Okay, the next talk will be from